When considering the speed of traversal, the fast loading, and the increased level of detail, I feel we're looking at a game that simply wouldn't be feasible on the last generation PlayStation 4. So this is kind of a quote-unquote next-gen game. It's a case where more capable hardware is used to enhance the overall game experience rather than just the visuals. But of course, there is a visual component as well, and that's ray tracing. This was a big deal when Miles Morales launched alongside the PS5, and things have improved. Firstly, unlike the prior 3 Insomniac games on PlayStation 5, the development team made the decision to focus exclusively on ray tracing in SpiderMan 2. That means every mode in the game uses ray tracing and there are no options to disable it. I feel it's a positive step forward though, as it allows the team to embrace certain decisions around the presentation without worrying about fallbacks. It's essential for a game packed with gleaming skyscrapers and reflective surfaces, and it almost feels like revenge for the 2018 Puddlegate situation, if you remember that one. Needless to say, thanks to ray traced reflections, puddles are no longer an issue. But before we dig into the RT reflections themselves, I want to spell out exactly what the various modes on offer bring to the table. If ray tracing is forced on in every mode, what does this mean for the player? So, SpiderMan 2 includes both a performance and a quality mode. These are expected, right? In addition, they also offer the option to output at 60 or 120 Hz. Using 120 Hz unlocks the 40 frames per second quality mode. So, quality mode can be enjoyed at a solid 30 frames per second or a solid 40 frames per second. Both use dynamic resolution scaling, ranging from 1440p all the way up to 4K. Insomniac's temporal injection then is used to handle anti-aliasing, and it does a great job. Both modes stick to their target frame rate most of the time, but there are occasionally some blips in specific sequences and on camera cuts. The 40 FPS mode also sees the resolution drop closer to 1440p more often than in the 30 FPS mode. Performance mode then is designed to target 60 frames per second, and I found that it is reasonably stable as well. This one, however, tops out at a maximum resolution of 1440p, but it can drop as low as 1008p. That's right, 1008, not 1080, at the absolute lowest. One benefit of this is, if you're using a 1440p monitor with your PS5, the game will natively output a proper 1440p image, including the HUD. Performance again is largely stable, adhering to the 60 FPS line, but alpha effects like smoke and dust, especially during these large-scale sequences, can drop the frame rate slightly below 60 FPS. There's more, however. Insomniac offers 3 VRR modes: off, smooth, and uncapped, and this is an awesome feature. Obviously, disabling VRR means you'll get judder if the frame rate falls out of its target range. But what's the difference between smooth and uncapped? The smooth option retains the frame rate cap, so if you're in performance mode, for instance, the maximum frame rate is 60 frames per second, and VRR can smooth out any drops that may occur. Uncapping the frame rate, however, allows it to go above the target, which in the case of performance mode averages out to around 65 to 80 frames per second, but it can go even higher. Removing the cap in quality mode then allows it to go above 40 frames per second, where it sort of averages between 40 and 60. When using the uncapped performance mode though, the game's resolution can now drop to a minimum of 936p as an absolute worst case scenario, but other modes will not drop to this point. The options menu here is so good that we want to produce an actual dedicated video on this topic, so we'll have more of this around launch. But for day one players, the key here is that SpiderMan 2 offers a wide range of choices when it comes to image quality versus performance. For my money, I'd have to go with the 40 frames per second mode, as I feel it strikes a perfect middle ground between the two. When comparing them side by side, you can see that the visual quality is maintained across both options. It really is just an adjustment to the resolution. The game looks fantastic in quality mode, whether you're using 30 frames per second or 40 frames per second. And thanks to a new capture card we're testing, we're actually able to show the 40 frames per second mode here captured at 4K. Pretty cool, right? As for performance mode versus quality mode, however, there are certainly more differences. LOD distance is pushed out slightly in quality mode, there's more objects receiving ray traced reflections, like here in this intro scene. The shadow quality is better in quality mode, and more, but since we only have 20 minutes for this initial video, we'll have more on this in a follow-up. So, you might be wondering then, if all modes feature ray tracing, what does it actually mean for the visuals themselves beyond resolution? Why did they make this decision? Well, I think a large part of this ties into the new, larger map, specifically the water. You see, it's now possible to cross the river, opening up a larger slice of New York, including Queens and Brooklyn. What this means for the player is that you'll spend more time crossing over the river. Thus, for SpiderMan 2, Insomniac opted to extend ray-traced reflections to all bodies of water for the first time. Here's the thing though, water reflections are challenging. The nature of choppy water means a high water surface roughness. Rougher surfaces result in more computationally expensive reflection rendering, and prior Insomniac games relied exclusively on screen space reflections as a result. There was some confusion over this, and this is down to the choppiness of the water. You don't get perfect mirror reflections on water like this, and you can see it if you look at photographs of the real New York skyline. That's what they're attempting to simulate here. Now, if we compare it to SpiderMan Remastered, the benefit becomes rather obvious. Distant environments receive more precise and realistic reflections in SpiderMan 2. More importantly, there's no disocclusion artifacts, which is the norm for SSR. You know, when a character model occludes the environment, which is normal for a third-person game, there's no longer any screen space information to draw from, creating noticeable artifacts in the reflection. By using ray-traced water reflections in SpiderMan 2, this problem does not occur. Which is good because flying across the water is a lot of fun. You can catch a breeze sometimes, but Spider-Man even has a move that allows him to glide along the surface of the river as well. It really opens up the world and feels great. But of course, ray tracing is also applied to smaller bodies of water, such as ponds and streams found in Central Park and other places throughout the environment. Given the calmness of the water in these scenarios, the reflections appear more mirror-like in Spider-Man 2. But this isn't the only enhancement that's been made to the RT reflections. So firstly, secondary reflections have been implemented. You know, where glass that is reflected within glass shows its own reflection based on an angle. If you recall in Miles and SpiderMan Remastered, this was not the case, and looking at a reflection within a reflection just provided a color basically. In Spider-Man 2, however, reflections of reflections are now visible if you look closely at the reflection of the glass in other glass. I'll give you a second to wrap your head around that, but it's a nice touch. Secondly, VFX are now rendered using ray tracing in many instances, so things like explosions and particle clouds are drawn into the game's reflective surfaces. Beyond that, there's simply more objects included within the BVH structure, meaning that reflections are more accurate to the surrounding environments. These reflections are also higher quality with less smearing and fizzle. For my money, it's the best example of ray-traced reflections you'll find in an open-world console game as of 2023. Nothing else comes close. But if you look beyond the reflection itself, you'll discover another major improvement: interior spaces. So, the prior Spider-Man games relied on cube maps to fake the illusion of a 3D space within the building structures, but if you look too closely, the limitations were plainly evident, right? It's just a flat texture. This is a tough problem to solve. Trying to render out a bunch of individual cubes through transparent windows, each with their own geometry, lighting, and shadows, is really expensive. Yeah, you could use Portal's map to a texture for this, but with so many rooms, I just don't think it's viable. So, what the heck are they doing? Well, after some pixel peeping, I think I have an idea. I noticed that the internal room geometry on the other side of the glass exhibits obvious checkerboarding artifacts, along with more visible aliasing versus the clean geometric edges surrounding the window. The projected shadows within the cubes are also basically perfect, suggesting we're not looking at shadow maps. Given this, I think what they're really doing here is leveraging its ray tracing support to create virtual spaces. Basically, I surmise they've stored a bunch of individual rooms within the same BVH structure as the rest of the city. And when a ray hits the glass of a building, they can then trace into these rooms that are off screen and figure out the lighting, shadows, and more. So you end up with real 3D spaces within the buildings. It's a remarkably elegant solution to a very difficult problem to solve.